going to build as effectively as it should. There's this thing called complexity science, and thank goodness, now people are starting to look at the human brain as something, not just bits and pieces of things that are happening, not just something that's going to change because a reward has been given, but really this dynamic integration that's happening there. And again, complexity science says this dynamic process of integration occurs at the edge of chaos. Well, and often, again, if you walk into a classroom and you see children playing together, there is kind of this sense of the edge of chaos. I'm not saying that it's necessarily chaos, but you can't predict what's going to happen next. There is nobody telling children what to do next. It's all about what happens, what it comes into the child's mind about what to do next. But what they're recognizing now is, in order for this brain to work well together, the child can't be sitting at a desk, at a table, following rules all day. In order for that to happen, there has to be enough time in the early years. So enough chaos, but enough order to provide stability, but enough dynamism for the system to continually adapt and grow. For children to be able to play things that are difficult, and we're not going to get into a lot of that today, but I just loved this because it made sense of kind of the organized chaos that should be what we see when we allow children to play freely. And by the way, another plug here, the more we can take our children outdoors, the less we have to worry about what they can and can't do, because the outdoors is a whole lot more forgiving. And so this integrated slate enables a system to move towards maximizing complexity, and that's about the system's optional functioning. I'm trying to remember, I'll go back here. Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel, again, another person who studied a lot about the brain. He says that optimal functioning systems are flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. And again, if you go into Dan Siegel's work, he talks about developing social skills, how children develop social skills. But it is really this kind of paradox, because we want our children to be able to manage themselves, but they can't manage themselves unless we give them a chance to figure out how to manage themselves. And we need to give it a lot of leeway. Just a couple of other little ideas that Panksepp brought up, and this is around ADHD. So he says that one of the things he looked at was psychostimulants. So Ritalin actually reduced the natural play urges of human children. But a regular diet of physical play each and every day during childhood should alleviate ADHD symptoms and diminish the number of kids on clinical track. And let me just make a little sidebar here again. We know that the children who get diagnosed with ADHD are, for the most part, the youngest, besides certain children, but there's a huge tendency of the youngest children in a classroom of being diagnosed with ADHD. Well, because if they enter kindergarten, and I have seen that at 3 years old, and if we don't have a highly play-based K4 program, those children will have missed nearly 12 months of playtime. And that is going to be part of what contributes to their ADHD. And so he basically says, play will have long-term pro-social benefits for children's brains that the psychostimulants can't do. And the other thing that he worries about is that if we just keep putting kids on drugs, they're going to actually seek out drugs when they get older. The trouble is we can't conduct genetic studies profile, activation of gene activation in human beings. We just can't do that. And so he says we would probably see that the brain that's on psychostimulants, so the ADHD child who's been given Ritalin as early as some of them as 4 years old, that their brain will look different than the child who's not on psychostimulant. But you can't give a psychostimulant to a child who doesn't warrant the prescription. So we can't just take two well-functioning young children and put one on Ritalin and see what happens to their brain a little while later. We can't do that. But he says, therefore, we need to develop social policies that encourage abundant early physical play to promote pro-social brain and mind development. And again, they've looked at as much as they can, frontal and posterior cortical regions are significantly modified by play within an hour of a 30-minute play session. So we're already starting to have, again, confirmation that play changes the brain. And the last thing is that that one of the things that Panksepp recommended, and this isn't a published study, but I think I can get you that study, or at least a reference to it, is that they routinely counseled fathers, especially in families with young ADHD children, to expend the special effort of having daily periods of rough and tumble play with their children. And everybody said the kids got better. Of course, we know that other big factor that's happening here is it's creating a positive attachment relationship, perhaps with a parent who might have felt a little more on the outside. And also, again, we often discourage males from doing rough and tumble play. They seem to be more predisposed to it. I mean, maybe in my generation, certainly my husband did rough and tumble play with our children. I didn't really do it. And so this gives the fathers a bona fide thing to do. All right. So what did we see here? Self-regulation skills are better in those children who are allowed to play without interruption. When children are engaged in a play activity, they stay selectively focused on the situation at present. They tune out distractions. They hold information in their heads. Isn't that a wonderful thing that you need to do later on when you need to do more academic kind of things? It allows children to develop the capacity to reflect, to look, to listen, to feel before acting on primary emotional urges. Rough and tumble play builds the capacity to read social signals and to manage one's behavior and urges. And ADHD seems to be related to a deficit in playtime.